Welcome back to Living Right with Dr. Ray. For better or for worse, or for worst, what the world thinks is the worst for some turns out to be the best. Mary Lou Beers, thank you so much for joining me. I saw your story in an abbreviated form on YouTube. Tell me about your marriage, your husband Jim, where you are now.
Thank you very much. I have a wonderful husband, and I say I have one because he's in heaven, but we are still united. We were married in 1964. I had just had open heart surgery, so having a wedding right after having heart surgery was a wonderful, wonderful blessing and
You
full
were
of
that
gratitude.
nervous about marrying a guy,
I tell you, I
All right.
was. He said to check out my heart, I did. And married this wonderful man, and we had 4 wonderful little children, Kathy, Julie, Amy, Jimmy Joe, and Jimmy Joe. And one day my husband left to go to work. He was 30 years old, and he suffered a massive stroke. He would never
How
walk
massive?
again. He would never walk again. He would never talk, never be able to chew or swallow or close his own eyes or dress himself. And those beginning days at a hospital, I kept hearing the words, "There's no hope, there's no hope, there's no hope. Your husband's on a ventilator, he's packed in ice, there's no hope." But there was something about his eyes when I would walk into that room. I knew he wasn't in a coma. They might tell me he is, but he would look at me with those big brown eyes like, "Help me." And even though his whole body was paralyzed and unable to breathe, there was something about those eyes. And so I stayed 12 hours a day by his side. I prayed with him. I sang to him. One day I was so desperate, I brought the bills. "I'll shock you out of a coma." And it was about 90 days had gone by and no change in the condition. And
What were they preparing you for?
that he would be a vegetable the rest of his life. And
That he would pass away?
yes, that he would pass away. But I was into the room, and on the 90th day, somebody said, "Mary Lou, you should think about divorcing him," not because of not loving him, but because the Medicare situation in those days, you couldn't be married and still get the kind of financial support that we needed. And I was just filled with all these thoughts that didn't make any sense to me. I love this man. I had stalked him all through high school. I love him. And I went into his room and I said, "Jim, I can't do this anymore. I give up. I just can't do this. I'm here every day. If you know it's me, you just have to let me know. Wiggle a toe, blink your eyes." And his hands had washcloths in them and they were crossed on his chest like this. And I said, "Do anything, Jim." And I saw his right hand just wiggled a little bit, and I said, "You're alive, Jim. How many children do you have?" 1, 2, 3, 4 little wiggles. That's cognitive brain matter. You're alive. "Jim, I'm a teacher. Think of a word that you want to say to me, and I'll say the alphabet, and you move your hand. A, B," and his hand moved on the letter B. So I took a marker and I put a B on a poster board and went through the whole alphabet again, and the word was breakfast. Breakfast. He had no food for 90 days. I was so excited. I ran out to a head nurse. "You're wrong. He's not in a coma. He wants breakfast." And this beautiful nurse who loved me dearly just embraced me and patted me on my back, and she said, "Mary Lou, you are hoping beyond hope." And I don't know what those words mean, because hope is one of the greatest virtues that we have. And I went back in Jim's room and I brought the doctor with me, and he spelled out to the doctor, "I miss my kids. Could they come?" And that was like the turning point of our lives.
His mind was completely intact.
Exactly. He heard, he saw, he thought, he felt everything that had gone on for those 90 days, but he was unable to express any of it. And then as we started spelling, and the next 33 years, spelling was our main way of communication. He would spell out things that happened. He knew the doctors' names who did different surgeries. He knew everything that had gone on. So it just opened up a whole new world. I said it was sort of like the women going to the tomb on Easter Sunday, and it was empty. He's alive. he's not dead, he's alive. And we were going to take on a new appearance. And it was going to be a long, hard struggle. But that day was the day I knew that we had hope.
Did people confuse you? Did they say, Mary Lou, you can't be expected to handle this. You've got 4 little kids, and then you had 5.
We did.
Another story for another time.
That's right.
You can't take care of someone who needs 24-hour care. Did you get anybody that confused you like that?
Yes, I got many people who confused me like that. Jim spent 18 months in hospitals. And at the end of those 18 months, our children were just 7, 6, 5, and 3. And it was the children who said, Mommy, bring Daddy home. We'll help you take care of him. And they told me that I should institutionalize Jim. But we had a community of support. I had 4 little kids who said, Mommy, we'll help you. And maybe I was young and naive, and maybe I was in love. And I do believe when Jesus said love endures all things, that Jesus means that love is the greatest of virtues. And I brought Jim home, and yes, I was very naive. I put him on my back and I carried him in the front door, and these 4 little kids are following me, and I laid him on the couch. And
I saw you carried him to the car, you carried him to bed, you carried him to take care of him hygienically. You carried him.
I did. And I'm not
When you came into the studio, you were limping on your hip. Because?
Well, 30-some years of carrying someone and transferring them has done a little damage to my hip, but I have no regrets. I would do every day all over again.
Did you love him more with time, or were you mentally and physically exhausted?
I think I was mentally and physically exhausted, but I loved him with a passion. And I do believe that there were days that Jim and I could just say to one another, we hate strokes, but we love one another. It's okay to hate the disease, but I love you beyond all of that. That doesn't mean there weren't days of real struggle, financial struggles, spiritual struggles. We just didn't feel welcome at times in places that we had been. Churches really, you're thinking 33 years ago, churches weren't as physically accessible for folks. Theaters weren't, restaurants. In order for Jim to eat, I had to put his food in a blender, and then I had to process it till it looked like mashed potatoes. And then if I would only sit on his right side and make sure he wasn't breathing when I put a spoonful of food into him, or else he would aspirate it. But going out to dinner and having food blended in a restaurant, people often looked at you like, where do you belong? And yet Jim would talk with his thumb. They said he'd be paralyzed for life, but that little wiggle turned into a thumb. Thumbs up was yes, thumbs down was no, and that's a maybe. And those 4 little kids, they would talk to their daddy's thumb and get their messages, and they'd bring their report cards home, and they either got a thumbs up or a thumbs down. And then one of his other favorite signs was this one. That meant you're grounded.
How did the kids be affected? How were they able, as they got older, 13, 14, 15, 16 years of age, watching this marital relationship that wasn't typical? No. Mom was a caretaker. What did it do to their maturity, their souls, their look at life?
Well, I think we've had the 5th child along the way, and I think they've all become these incredibly wonderful, caring, compassionate human beings. And I think they lived a life where they knew giving of themselves was very, very important and very vital to who we are, that it's in giving that we receive. And I watched them grow. And I remember one of my girls coming home when she was a teenager and saying, I kissed him goodnight, but I thought to myself, would I love him if he drooled? And so I think in the back of their mind, they always were realizing that love is beyond the physical appearance. Love is loving the person for who God created that person to be. And I think it opened eyes.
Did you wrestle with being mad at God?
I have to be honest with you. I don't think I've ever been mad at God. I think I've questioned, like, this isn't how this marriage was supposed to be. I was the one who had heart surgery. We started out with, already a crisis in our life. And then only 7 years later, a stroke. I wondered how God would give us the strength and the courage that God promised to give us. And I love my Bible. And if I had it with me, it's all underlined and pages are torn, you know, and I would write in the margin, you promised, you know. And I just prayed that somehow God could use a couple of broken beers. And Jim passed away 8 years ago, and I can honestly say that even in the moments of his death, you know, the last things Jim spelled out to me was he knew he was dying. He had had a heart attack on Christmas Day. I did question God that day. It's Christmas, God, it's Christmas. And then as you think back, you think, well, what greater gift could I give to God on Christmas than my spouse? And
You don't realize what you have within you until you're put in a situation that pulls it out.
thank you.
Thanks, Mary Lou.
You're very welcome. Thank you.